Liu, que es esta quien nos va a presentar una charla en inglés sobre videojuegos chinos, un vehículo para el cambio social. Voy a presentar brevemente a la doctora Felania Mengfei Liu, perdonad, que es Liu, ella, I'm sorry, es historiadora de videojuegos y diseñadora de gamificación y es actualmente supervisora de estudiantes de máster y profesora de departamentos de medios digitales en la Universidad Normal de Beijing. También es miembro fundadora y ex miembro de la Junta Vigra China y una figura muy activa en el emergente campo de los estudios de juegos en China. Ella también mantiene, digamos, una actividad que es importante del archivo Homo Ludens, que es el único archivo de juegos sin fines de lucro en China, ¿no? Y es directora del China Gamification Institute, la primera organización oficial de gamificación de China. Hay muchas actividades más en las que la profesora Liu está involucrada, pero no voy a digamos, extenderme más para darle la bienvenida. Nuestro traductor al español, si vais a hacer uso de este servicio, es Diego Barroso Sánchez, que es un ludólogo y está actualmente cursando un doctorado en medios creativos en la Universidad City University of Hong Kong. Y bueno, agradecemos a los dos que estén disponibles para hablar de los videojuegos chinos, un vehículo para el cambio social. Muchas gracias. Bueno, Professor Liu, now you have all our attentions, please. We are listening.
Thanks, Andreas, for introducing me, and thanks the Confucius Institute in Madrid to extend
al Instituto Confucio de Madrid por esta invitación.
Some of my research that I find you may also find it interesting. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen now, or am I already sharing it? Let me do it.
Not yet sharing.
Okay, then I'm start sharing now.
您还是得分享那个现在已经播放那一页，现在还是那个 PPT。
Okay, this should be right now. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about Chinese video games, a vehicle.
Hoy hablaremos de los videojuegos chinos, un vehículo para el cambio social.
I was trained to be an historian, and so I've got all my degrees from the history department. I insisted on staying in the history department and then still researching on video games and their social impact. And for years, I've been questioned, why do I study, why do I research on video games and their social impact without doing game history? So ever since 2018, when I graduated from Tsinghua University's history department, I went to Beijing Normal University to work as a full-time researcher. And it
Decidí dedicarme a la investigación a tiempo completo.
A historian would want to study video games by setting
y
up.
Respondería a la pregunta de por qué una historiadora se dedicaría a los juegos.
A lot of the things that I'm sharing today, the real vehicle for social change that we are using right now, it is that Homo Ludens archive. And so, but basically I began my research career by asking this question: what is Chineseness in Chinese games, if there's any? Because a lot of the people are already aware that China right now had a booming game industry.
Como muchos saben, en la actualidad en China,
a population of over 65 million people, and where in the meantime produce tremendous amount of industry income. But in the meantime, I believe there are people who actually play Genshin Impact or other type of popular Chinese games that people are not aware that they are actually produced by Chinese developers. So once I began this research, I insisted in finding whether there's anything very particular to China, in other words, Chineseness in Chinese games. Just like the case with people are aware, there is a game type called JRPG, Japanese RPG, which means the Japan's culture had a unique impact on the type of game that they're producing. And whether China also has that type of special influence, it is the question that I'm trying to ask. So what I did is that in 2015, I did this research with support from some local industry that I reviewed popular games back then, and then listed them and analyzed them to make up a model to see whether cultural factors play any important role in those popular games in China. So let me stretch this up. So this is the standard that I'm using, that by defining popular game, I mean games who enjoy global users exceed 5 million and Chinese users over 1 million. And the data all comes from official data and App Store. And then they enjoy the popularity lens over 3 years in China. The scope of popularity should be evaluated based on the high frequency of play.
Con una popularidad de más de 3 años, y el alcance de su popularidad es la alta frecuencia de juegos en cibercafés, la alta
group of interesting games. That is, there are games that are popular worldwide and also popular in China. Back in 2015, those games are World of Warcraft, League of Legends, and Clash of Clans. And then there are popular games that are very popular worldwide, but not in China, which includes EverQuest, EVE Online, and Monster Strike, and things like that. And there are games that are only popular in China and no one knows about them elsewhere. For example, the Chinese Paladin series. The JX3 refers to a game called The Sword Legend Online, and it is the Chinese equivalent of World of Warcraft. And also we have Dot Arena and All-Star Heroes, which were only popular in China. And also I reviewed the popular offline games in China, including Mahjong and Killer Game. A killer game is a type of board game where a group of people just sit together and they all have different identities, and then they would find who is the killer. So basically, that's all the games that we reviewed, and then we come up with a model, which I will not bug you about, but you can see that in this grow triangular model, we listed what's important in those games and what players valued and what the community activity is. And then if we take a look at all these popular games, we would come up with a sort of formula thing. For example, successful games worldwide and in China, we can see, for example, World of Warcraft, where we would have teamwork plus combat skill plus strategy plus competitiveness plus showing off and exploration, things like this. And so in the end, we come up with this chart where you can see the cultural theme of the game does not affect their popularity. Both Western games and Chinese games are popular here. Then what really matters is what type of actions you took in those games. And so based on that, we also have this conclusion that cultural factors did have its have its influence on games. It means that it does not matter whether the cultural theme is of Chinese culture. But what really matters is the Chinese gamers prefers game that enjoys this sixth trait. The first one is games with a quantitative system in which they can compete with others and showing off the statistics or equipment. And the second trait is games that are recommended by the App Store, especially the ones that the majority of people play. And the third trait is the game or gamification systems that brings physical rewards. And the fourth and fifth are games that have simple rules where strategy can be applied to competition. And the sixth is games that with a more attractive appearance. So we conclude those six characteristics as this pattern, where we would see that successful games in China shares this sixth trait, that first data rules, and then they should have a tangible awards. And then there's this sort of conformity that the more people play it and the more popular it is. And then Chinese players really enjoy simplicity in the rules. And also the appearance really matters. And what's really interesting is about this social competition factor, where in terms of social factors, that worldwide, all sorts of online games.
En todo el mundo, todos los juegos en línea tienen factores sociales,
enjoy different type of social behavior.
Pero la gente en diferentes partes del mundo disfrutan diferentes tipos de competencia.
Style of social interaction where people were grouped into different professions and different and diverse players could work together instead of competing against each other to achieve a goal. Where in a Japanese setting, in terms of the social interaction, you would see in games like Final Fantasy, where people would actually sit together and talk about things, and then they would dress themselves and cosplay, and that's their definition of social factor. Where in terms of the popular games in China, we can see the Chinese players see the sort of social factor as a way of competition, that you have to compete with others and you have to win someone over. And that is defined as the most popular social factor in those popular games in China. And that's why we list it as social competition. So what Chinese players really values is that they should win others by this social competition. And so here comes an image of sometimes this game is what we call the national sport, which is mahjong. And if you take a look at mahjong, you will find that it actually fits all the six factors. For example, mahjong would have a data system where you can count and see. And then mahjong had been very popular, where it was distributed along all sorts of social classes. And then in mahjong, you would see people actually play it with real money and tangible physical reward. But what is really important is that the social competition side, where in mahjong, people not only play together, but they also try to guess each other's intention. And it's a sort of not only social competition, but interaction based on social competition. People talk to each other and people communicate while they were playing mahjong. So it was not only a set of game, but it's also one of the major social interaction genre and interaction arena during that time. And then you can see mahjong's rules are really simple. And so it also meets the fifth factor. And then appearance matters. Normally mahjong would have a very beautiful patterns printed on it. And then the physical side of it is also pretty fun and easy to play with. And so also based on that factor,
Con base en esos factores, podemos hablar de Genshin Impact y podemos entender por qué es uno de los juegos más populares en China.
Three of the six factors. I will not spend more time in explaining this, but what I want to reveal is that though it seems that popular games in China does not have a very specific taste towards Chinese culture, there had indeed be a very Chinese attitude towards gaming. And here comes another research that I've done in 2011, where I reviewed the 24 history books that had encompasses over 4,000 years of history. And then I searched the Chinese counterpart for gaming, the concept of gaming in the classics, and then categorize those historical texts into groups and try to investigate three things. One is, who were the gamers? And the second one is, in what context do they game? And the third is, what's their consequences or the social evaluation of those gamers? And here comes the result. On the right column, it listed how many hits do we get in terms of searching for games, gamers, players, and that sort of Chinese terms in the 25 histories. And then on the left, we can see that the context for the Chinese gamers are either instrument or gestures, or that the context is talking about tyrants or incapable rulers, or we are talking about ill magistrates and sycophants, or the 8 trigrams or hermits. And what I really want to remind people of is all this context was very far from the major political scene. And then if we take a further look at game, in the 25 histories, like who were the players and what are the consequences or evaluation of them, then it becomes more interesting that we can firstly see from the left, the players from the 25 histories are either sycophants and ill magistrates or servants or concubines or tyrants. All of them were not important political figures. And then we would have childhood of great men who actually play in a very different way than others. For example, the ancestor of agriculture in China, who actually is called Hou Su. And in the 25 histories, it was described that Hou Su played in a different way. While the other children just do their child play, Hou Su loves planting all sorts of crops in his back garden. So that is a way to show that important people, so-called literati and junzi, they actually play in a very different way. And they were not the majorly mentioned players in the 25 history. And what has been mentioned as players in the Chinese history book are all the sycophants and tyrants, the negative people. And that is actually a discovery that actually startled me, because I wasn't expecting to find the players to be so negative. I was looking for something that maybe I thought I would find there are positive figures, and then there are negative figures, and then there are some neutral figures. But what I find out is that the players were almost like all bad. And then the only good players are the ones who doesn't play the way the others did. So I think that is a very important discovery that actually shows the Chinese has a certain attitude towards gaming. And I conclude that as junzi, the major ruling class, the ruling literati, they don't play. And then if we take a look at the consequence and the evaluation of the Chinese players, we would see that normally in the 25 history, people think play or game diverted those people from the serious real business that they should focus on. So that's what I mentioned about 君子 never play. And most players end up being losers for life, as mentioned in the history book. And then great man plays in a very different way, a way that keeps the more serious purposes of their life. And I think this idea, 君子 never play, actually intrigued me to look at the further cultural factors behind this thinking. So it is very surprising to me that the Chinese culture would hold this very negative attitude towards,
Para mí fue muy sorprendente que la cultura china tuviera esta
towards gaming.
actitud muy negativa hacia los juegos.
And then suddenly think it might be not a collective Chinese effort, but a Confucius attitude. So to confirm with that, I then reviewed the history book that view history from a Confucius guidelines and a very specifically Confucius focused perspective. And I got basically the same attitude that players are victims of desire, they're subcultural, they were animal-like, game deprived them of the effort and time that they should pay to work. And this confirms that actually what we found from the last slide, that in the 25 histories, it is said that the normal literates don't play. It is not a Chinese attitude, but actually a Confucius attitude. And are there other cultural attitude in Chinese culture about game? Yes. I further inspect at the classics of Taoism and Buddhism and folklores and Chinese poetry and literature. And then I find some quite different results. For one, we would have the playing literati who once retreat from their official Confucius post into their individual life. Then they play mental games, they produce creative works, they would write poetries, and then they would use a gameful attitude towards life and create other games. While in the meantime, we also find a notion of playing Buddha in the Buddhist literature, where actually now the player is Buddha. And Buddha plays as a demonstration of full realization and absolute freedom. And he also makes salvation possible to normal people through playing. I think this is very interesting compared to the unplaying Junzi. And then you have the playing Buddha, and then you have the literati who claim that they don't play once they were on a political role. But then when they retreat to the individual lives, they actually play and play a lot. So I think for the entire Chinese culture, there is this diverse attitude towards play. But the majority of the literati, the majority of the talent who actually receive the Confucius thinking never thought about whether they had been affected by this very negative cultural attitude produced by Confucius. I then also look at real games that were played by Asian Chinese and find there had been this trend that those type of popular games had a trend of going downwards from the royalties to the civilians. And also there had been this trend of popular folk games, firstly physical and then mental. And poets and literatists also wrote a lot of poetry to acclaim the spirit of gaming. Yet overall speaking, the society follows the Confucius attitude. And that actually explains a very interesting dilemma that the Chinese people are facing today in China, that although we have a booming gaming industry, we also have a very strict rules on youngsters playing games, that young children in China, people below 18 years old, can only play 3 hours per week, which sounds absurd. But if you take a cultural perspective, if you take what I just researched into consideration, then the idea of playing Junzi, that the mainstream literati don't play, would actually have a say in this weird phenomenon. And here I listed some of the Asian games that Chinese people really enjoyed playing. For example, 蹴鞠, a Chinese version of football, which had been very popular because some of our emperors from Song Dynasty really loved that game, and so royalties play that. And then we have backgammon, who is widespread, and I think the Arabs also play them, and the Westerners play them. Today, we still have the backgammon global competition, and you can see that normally for the Asian Chinese, when they list game settings, it was always about social competition. It always has this social setting, and then you would have a group of high-ranked people who were playing while talking in the same time. And then cockfighting, the very famous great poets from Tang Dynasty, Li Bai, and also Du Fu, they all wrote a lot of poetry on cockfighting, and they enjoy the spirit of game in it. So, so I think to understand this Chinese attitude, I mean, the attitude that is really, while people play, but they also claim that they hate play, or play would make you, would divert you from a real serious normal life. I mean, that type of attitude, I think we can understand them in two different ways. One way to look at it is to see it as attitude from an agricultural society, where under the traditional time frame, time spent for leisure cannot be spent for working. So there had been this compete for time. And because they compete for time, it is that if you have one day and you play, then you would not have time to work. And so that explains why Confucius is so against gaming. While also there had been this cultural historical trend that we need to take into consideration, is that the Confucius idea after Song Dynasty and Ming Dynasty grew to be more and more rigid about containing human nature, and then value collectivism instead of individualism. And but that is interesting because Confucius himself is not entirely against gaming. Not only that, the literates actually became Junzi through the education of the 6 arts, and almost all of them are games, as you can see from this slide, where if you take a look at the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the 6 arts, where there includes calligraphy, and includes archery, and then there's mass, and then there's ritual, and then there's music, and then there's horse riding. So these are the 6 arts that a Junzi would need to perform in order to become a Junzi. But if you take every look at them, every one of these 6 arts were actually games. So it is very interesting that actually a Junzi becomes Junzi through gaming. But in the meantime, Confucius' idea is against gaming. So how to understand this conflict? I think it is not because Confucius really despises games, but because Confucius values collectivism. And while in the meantime, games are very individual. So if we take a look on the right, that the Confucius Junzi's way to so a full-grown Junzi should do 3 things, 4 things. Firstly, he should cultivate himself and self-disciplined, and then he should maintain a very harmonious family, and then he should govern his state. And then in the long run, there would be universal peace. So if you take a closer look at those doctrines, you can see it's actually an arrow upwards. So which means the meaning of each circle would find meaning in the circle outside it. For example, why would you cultivate and discipline yourself? Because you need to maintain a harmonious family. Why would you maintain a harmonious family? Because you need to govern a state. Why would you govern a state? Because you need the universal peace. So you can see, in order to be a Junzi, you need to find place in the outer ring circle. And in order to have a say in the outer ring circle, you would need to work very diligently and be very self-disciplined, and so that you can find your place in society. Well, in the meantime, if we take a look at the left, for example, if you play one of the 6 arts, you do archery, and then the minute that you shoot the arrow out, when it hits the target, you receive an immediate feedback that it got hidden. And then you would feel this fulfilling attitude that the game would sustain itself. So I think that is actually the reason that the Confucius idea values collectivism, which means you need to delay your fulfillment until the popularity, until the public reply to you with it. Well, in every type of game is actually self-fulfilling. It is very individualism, and a collectivism ideology cannot accept any medium that's really values individuality, because if you play a game, then you get fulfilled yourself. Then you do not need to wait for the others to acclaim you or to give response to you. And that would ruin the pillars of eternity for collectivism. So I think the Chinese, the Confucius attitude against gaming, the way that Junzis don't play, is actually because Confucius values collectivism, and game is all about individualism. And so on the basis of that, we would find that games are actually not a type of addictive media, which is a direct, actually, I believe in the past 20 years, China had been very famous for the game addiction center, which is something that we are very strictly against. And the problem with the addiction center is that they do not rely on serious research. And there have been no clinical proof that game addiction is actually a disease. While in the meantime, the Chinese public took that very easily, I think because of that Confucius attitude that I just took time to explain. And that is why it is very important to realize that games are not only playful entertainment, are not only shallow fun, but also one of the really important digital cultural heritage that our society enjoys. And this brings us to Game Archive. And I'd like to revisit Michael Foucault's idea in the Archaeology of Knowledge, where he talked about the archive for not only being a pile of books, but also a set that continues to function, to be transformed through history, and to provide the possibility of appearing in other discourse, which means that we don't think archives are consisted of only books. We think archives are a place, a genre, an arena where different power struggle and power accumulates in this place. And so what really is important is that what function can game archive or preservation serve for the game industry and for the society beyond? But firstly, let me introduce you to a few current scenarios about game preservation conditions in China and its challenges. And we have spent the last 5 years doing game preservation work, and we have been in very close ties with the industry and the society. And so we do have some first-hand knowledge about what type of conditions currently it is in terms of game preservation and game literacy. And so currently there are 4 types of practices for game preservation in China. They are game museum and elite collectors and game shops, and also game archives. So those are the 4 types. And if you take a look at the game museum, we will review each type through what type of funding that they were relying on and their current conditions in China and others. So game museums were not what was absent in China, but game exhibitions are rising. And when we talk about game museums, we talk about museums that receive the national fund or government support. And they also would have a monthly income through the ticket sales and peripheral product sales. And then we would have the elite collectors, which actually are self-subsidized their little museums or the little shops. They also sell ticket, but sometimes they would also rent their place for commercial rental sales. So that would also include some, that would also help them to have a money flow. And currently the elect collector's place is in existence in China. And then in terms of game shops, it is really, it is one of the most popular type of existence among the 4. Normally it's run by commercial enterprise. They sell games and they sell peripherals. And then they would have commercial support from console producer like Sony or game machine producers. And it is very popular here. And when we talk about game archive, we used to be the only game archive in China, but then once we bloomed, there are other game archives that followed. There are commercial type of game archives, but generally speaking, HLA, the game archive that I founded is non-profit. So the support came from the non-profit foundation. And the funding was specifically collected for game preservation from the industry. And sometimes the public would also love to donate to us because we also do game literacy education programs. And that
a la alfabetización en juegos. Y como también soy una investigadora,
through the research fund. And so basically that's the 4 type. And then if we take a look at each of them, you would understand currently why game preservation in China would have so much challenge. To begin with, why we don't have game museums? I think it's because China has a rather low level of game literacy, and there had been this lack of game research. So from the government side, there had been a lack of support to game industry due to cultural ignorance and intentional negligence on games, due to what we just talked about, the very Confucius attitude to gaming. So overall speaking, from the government side, they see the economic value that the games are making. But culturally, they were very deeply influenced by Confucius' idea. And so games are not for 君子, 君子 don't play, and games were addictive and useless. And because of this thinking, there had also been a lack of expertise, talent, or game research to regulate the game industry. And that's why a lot of weird things happened. And then from the public side, it shares the same low level of game literacy, which preventing them from purchasing ticket. Parents are not in support of gaming, and school teachers are strongly against gaming. So kids cannot afford to buy any ticket into the museum by themselves. So from the public side, the game museum does not have a say in the current Chinese genre. And then from the player and industry side, normally the player the player and the industry would already own some of the collections that a game museum can provide, or they are very familiar with game items, so they will only come once, and that becomes an economic challenge for game museums. And then in terms of elite collectors, the low level of game literacy also have this impact that the government, of course, showed no support for all the reasons that we mentioned. And then from the public side, the same low level of game literacy actually prevent people from purchasing ticket. And parents, they come to this show once, and then they would question the meaning of paying to bring their children to play. As I mentioned, currently in China, children are allowed to play 3 hours per week in terms of online gaming. And so that shows a very strong public opinion on games, generally on teenagers and their negative effects. And so basically, it is very easy to understand why the elite collectors, little museums, are just basically survive on the collector's finance and more served as hobby project. So the photo that I show on the left are one of the little game collectors museums that they used to be a little museum, and then they go bankrupt, and then they become affiliated with our game archive and became our Hangzhou branch until last year we established a Shanghai branch and then replaced them. And then in terms of game shop, though from the government side, there's still no support. And from the public side, the public had no interest generally in gaming, but they might visit it for free. But then from the player side, the player would purchase game from the game shop, which means the game shop could become a local hub for player community. And as they will regularly purchase game machines, games, and peripherals and things like it. And then from the industry side, this type of game shop could receive support from console and hardware companies like Sony, as they also sell game machines. They could also host industry casual events like play testing or game gatherings. So this explains why this type is actually popular here. And then we would have the game archive, where from the government side, the government actually showed great interest and offered to provide venue and other support for us, which we do not accept for the current stage. And then from the public side, the public is interested as we don't charge them for any money, but also we provide free educational tools, safe access to the world of gaming for a lot of parents and teachers, and that wins their attitude over. And from the player side, we do not serve the players directly, but we offered research insights to the players through podcasts, documentaries, and exhibitions. So that would also win some of their support. 80% of the game artifacts that we keep in our archive came from public donation, which means the player are actually supporting us through donating their own games, their beloved game artifacts. And then from the industry side, that's the major support we receive, that they support us through donation, manpower, and other means. But the creators and indie developers and the large game companies research department or EISD department are the ones who love our game archive the most. And the major challenge for us is that there are too many things at a time. And I will now start to show some videos so that you could take a vivid look at what we are talking about. So this is a video from CCTV, and they did an English interview on us and then produced this video. You could just briefly take a look at how it became the way it is today.
目标和保存中国游戏和中国游戏人的历史，因为游戏就是文化软实力最有力的表达媒介，没有之一。 中国游戏史大家也知道非常年轻，之前也没有人觉得它是值得记录的，所以它就流失得非常厉害。就是一个没有记忆的产业是不可能长久的，它也不可能真的起到传达文化的功能。游戏是我们这个时代最新的数字媒体，你可以使用文字、图像、影像、音乐，可以兼容在它之前的所有媒介形态。虽然游戏的世界可能是虚拟，但是我们形成的关于性别的、文化的、民族的、宗教的认同是切实的，它是一种极其强力的价值观塑造媒介。就是我认为传统知识分子如果忽略了游戏这种表达媒介的话，很有可能我们就会在关于文化的各种阵地战当中输掉。坦克大战那个游戏，我爸带着我玩了非常久。我爸是学军事运筹学的，他就会教我说我们怎么搭这个东西，你看这个敌人他就过不来，或者我们在这里伏击他。进入游戏世界是在父亲的带领下进入的，所以我就一直认为，首先它是一个教育的媒介，因为我爸很明显是在拿它培养我，所以我可能会在上地理课之前去玩大航海，上历史课之前去玩文明和三国志。虽然我花的时间可能比他们少，但是我到最后就是我的考分就是比他们高，这个很合理，因为他们是面对的书本知识，但是我可是真的在游戏里去了里斯本，我是在游戏里真的进行过这些全球旅行，就游戏成为了我拓展生命可能性的一种方式。一直到现在，我的整个人生态度可能也是更接近于玩家的这一套，但是这不代表这是不严肃或者不认真的。我认为反过来，人只有在游戏的时候才最认真，而且我在游戏的时候我是 all in 的，就是我全神贯注的解决加给我的这个挑战。比如说你爱玩的游戏这个目标你没有，那你就想你在游戏的时候。我认为赌不如输，赌也赌不住。我们不应该在游戏的这个问题上，通过游戏成瘾的概念，把青少年推到我们的对立面去。不跟他站在一边的话，你无法对孩子在游戏里可能被造成侵害的这个状况及时援助。为了我们未来一代好的话，我们应该思考的是，我们怎么开始在我们的教育体系里把关于游戏的教育嵌进去。我们不仅应该告诉他们什么样的游戏不该玩，而且我们应该把一部分之前成年人也玩过且经过经验验证的好的游戏推荐给他们。更重要的是让他自己建立起一个责任意识，就是如果我要玩，那么我来管理自己的游戏时间，如果出现了不好的后果，我自己来负责。
So I guess that would give you a brief idea of what we are doing, and then we will continue to
Ahora
show
hablaremos.
a really interesting social experiment that we are doing. And firstly, based on that introduction, I won't go into details about our explorations and how to find our ecological niche in the total ecology of game industry here. But basically, we see ourselves as a sort of druid's arc. So druid are a type of natural protector who protects the ecology of nature. And I did a PhD thesis on druids and how it becomes one of the medium and how games became one of the medium during druid revival, a religious revival.
La idea del druida revivió por medio de los videojuegos.
Important is the idea of druid and the idea of game archive being a druid's arc that sell into the game industry to try to see what we can do and what we can help in order to maintain a healthier game ecology. So we are not protecting any particular game genre. We are not protecting any particular game company. What we are really protecting is a healthy ecology of the game industry and of a healthy ecology of what games can do to the society. And so HLA majorly serves two groups. One are the game creators and developers that we do oral history and creator interviews. And we provide game referencing service to them. And they consult us for example, when they develop a game on Chinese history, for example, the Three Kingdoms history, and then to what extent would be proper to portray the historical figures. And we normally would provide a very detailed report and guidelines to them on how to do that. And then we would also organize workshops and creation workshops for the game developers. And then we would provide standardized knowledge for creation and game research for game craft. But in terms of the public that we serve almost every stakeholders from the public, which not confined to gamers. For example, we would serve parents and supervising officials for the Chinese game industry and teachers. And for them, we do game exhibition with game literacy purposes. We would do documentaries, podcasts, public lectures, interviews for proper handling of games. And then we provide tools, for example, database that I was going to show, that workshops, special exhibitions, and things like it. And so if you take a look at Game Museum, then you can see the line, the economic line would look like what's been listed on the left-hand side. But if you take a look at a game archive, you can see it actually involves more diverse stakeholders. And we focus more on games as creations and as cultural object. And also we really value the cultural effect that the game would take for a society instead of only selling games or only valuing its commercial side. And so we provide different service to different type of stakeholders. To the game industry, we were just basically protecting and curating the ecology. To the government, we were normally consulted and to provide our expertise for a reasonable and scientific policy on gaming. And to the academia, we actually founded this archive originally to cultivate game research in China, but then we find there are more important things to do. And there are a lot of things that actually requires the efforts and helps from a game archive. And so academia is not the only field that we were active in. And then to the public, we provide them with education of game literacy. And then we provide tools. And I will ignore the other items in this chart and showing you the interesting social experiment that we are doing now. And I think to begin with, please remind yourself of the cultural shackle to break from. That from the very start, we mentioned to everyone about the Confucius legacy of the unplaying Junzi, and we mentioned the Chinese attitude of gaming. And then that particular attitude becomes a cultural shackle. And if we want to break from that shackle, we need the tool of game literacy. And game literacy is the most important social function for game to serve for a developing country and a developing industry. And game and education is the most attentive subject that the Chinese focus on. And HLA raised the concept of game literacy as the sort of literacy for all parties involved besides the player, and list what each stakeholder can do. And we define game literacy as a group of concepts that aim to understand games critically and to make use of them. And so on the left side of the screen, we listed 2 books that we publish on that topic. And what I'm going to show you now is a really interesting social experiment that we did. And that social experiment focused on the question of, can normal people convey social concerns through gaming? Can video games change the world? And we began with the 4th grade primary school student in the desert, and they do not play digital games at all. And they fail to say how important games are and how game can change the world, because the game cannot change their lives. Yet, after providing them with a task of creating a path in the desert and providing them with some board game artifacts, they come up with 3 games that's all happen in the desert, and that they all have their own idea of what that game is for. For example, this board game is about 3 people try to rescue an injured elephant. And this game is about an astronaut who is doing expeditions in the desert. And what I really want to remind you is, if you take a closer look at the map that's been drawn by the children, you will see they actually cross certain monsters. And on the left-hand side, there is a dying human. And that is actually one of the players, who is also one of the creators who created this game. So it is very interesting that when children are designing games, they were also playing in the meantime. So for them, play looks like an instinct. They do not need to learn how to make games. That they know how to play by instinct. And then since they already designed a board game, the 10-year-olds feel that they also want to make digital games. And so we come up with this sentence filling exercise where we would have this, as shown here, that we would give them this phrase list, and then they could fill in the blanks and putting the important information on the type of digital games that they want to design. Because the 10-year-old students are still very young, and they cannot manage to convey very abstract terms. So we need to help them to focus on what type of games they want to convey with the specific details that they fill in. And for example, this one shows that this group of students, there are 3 of them, and all girls, that they want to design a game that the major character is using magic, and then the major character would use hurricane to defeat monsters, and then they would encounter the obstacle of garbage in the desert, and then they overcome it, and they will have a teammate, and they will help each other, and then the end result is the humankind is being protected, and in the end people are very happy. And so that's what this group is written on this slides. And then the second group wants to create this game where people shoot each other in the desert, and in the end, they survived. So this is a Counter-Strike in the desert. And those 3 students are all males. So we try to, so I personally do not like the idea of creating a desert-themed Counter-Strike, because it actually provides a very stereotype of the desert, that there's nothing but monsters in it. But they really want to do it anyway, so you will see later. And then this group of 3 students want to create a desert oasis. They want to plant trees all over the desert. And then they combine their effort with the last group, whose aim is to go to the sun, and they help each other, and then in the end they reach the sun. So on the basis of these 3 groups, the student managed to make 3 games within the weekend. And that's the children's weekend. So the tool they're using is Roblox. And everything you will see in this video is produced entirely by the students alone. And you can see they make 3 games. And all 3 games was designed based on the sentence completion sheet that I just showed you. Okay, now we can enjoy it. So this is the first group of students who want to make a game to go to the sun. And so in this game, you gather materials and then you fight with the monsters and then with the material.
Encontrar el material y enfrentarte a los monstruos. Para llegar a una isla en el cielo. Y es que les indicamos a los estudiantes que si caminaban directo al cielo, se quemarían. Entonces, cambiaron a la idea de llegar a una isla en el cielo.
Este es el
segundo juego de los chicos, los 3 niños, varones, llamado La Tormenta de Arena. Y en el juego hay una tormenta gigante de arena y hay que rescatar a los pacientes de un hospital. Y físicamente es un Counter-Strike en el desierto.
People were actually having fun. As I will explain later, there is a reason why we go to the desert and find primary school students to make desert games. It was under a larger project where professional players, where professional designers, professional game companies in China were also brought to the Chinese desert to know more about the desert control.
Diseñadores profesionales irían al desierto y harían un ejercicio similar.
The game that the children is producing, and this maze game is the third one.
Este laberinto es el tercero. Nos muestra el tipo de juegos que en realidad disfrutan los niños. Siempre pensamos que les gustan cosas simples o fáciles.
Who's jumping over the wall and who's actually cheating. It is very difficult for the documentary director who records this video to survive in this maze game, as the children had no idea of user experience. They just design things at their will and they play very happily by hurting everyone. And I think it's really, what was really interesting is all the 3 games that you see just now were produced within 2 days and a half, and we never taught the students how to make games. We only let them know that they can, now they are offered with the opportunity to make games on the desert that they grow up in. And then they came up with all these brilliant game creations that are even better than what the professional game developers are doing. I don't understand why my screen is like this all the time, but let me show you this video. This is annoying. Okay.
1、2、3。Oh, they have some GoPros. It's kind of cool. It's not as bad as I thought.
How bad could it be?
No, I thought it was going to be like, shh. Okay, my name is Brian O'Shea. I'm a gamer. When the producers asked me to come host a show in the desert, I thought, what do I know about desert life?
饺子，我们现在坐车到沙漠里面只是吃，只这个臭包哥，自己一个人上，不要帮我。Let's go, baby！ 大家都拿好啊。We're the sand tamers.
When I was a kid, so I spent a lot of time playing video games. I think games are amazing, and I'm gonna study how to use them to make the world a better place.
要不要来个比赛？欢拍，欢拍！一、二、一、二。
Never met someone who studied gamification before. They're trying to change the world through gaming.
My name is Felania Mengfei Liu, and I'm a game scholar. I couldn't possibly imagine that any human being could live without game.
这个和您平时种树或者治沙什么的，您感觉？
所以这沙漠也变成这个样子就好了。
I was trained to be an environmental historian. The core question of this project, can video games change the world? It is the question that I've been pursuing for over 13 years.
很想看你们的这些创意，准备好了吗？
And what better way to test this theory than bringing 2 teams of game designers and their KOL consultants to the Chinese desert?
好冷啊，真的好冷。哇，我觉得有点冷。
They will compete over the next 5 episodes to see who's able to create games that best communicate the amazing work already done to fight desertification.
大家好，我们是来自于重庆帕斯亚科技一个制作游戏的团队，
给大家展示一下什么是真正的游戏。
听不懂。
This project is about when the two worlds collide.
能懂吗？这样解释？
懂了懂了。
盲盒大家都玩过吧
That would raise certain challenges for our game designers.
明天上午把你们的游戏做成一个可以向他们 present 的东西。
In this episode, they will pitch their early concepts to the Ningxia locals.
2个月后，我们会回到这儿，给大家都看一下这些游戏最后的版本是怎么样的。Can video games change the world? Yes!
So in this, so what you just see here finally came up with 5 full episodes. Each episode is consisted of 45 minutes, and that shows the whole social experiment of how desert control people and game people come together and to use game as a vehicle to sort of get into the important social problems. And on the right hand side is actually what we've been doing. HLA had been the major actor in that Discovery Asia documentary. And then we use game as a medium to give it to the normal people to use game as a way to express themselves. And so the previous video that I show you that using Roblox that the children were doing is actually to inspire more people to join the project. And then we attracted over 30 proposals from normal people who had no programming skills and who had no experience designing games, and then we curated them and we cultivate them, and then in 2 months time they come up with 4 board games on desert and 2 digital games, and 1 digital games on the right actually win a major award, a major developers award by Tencent. And so in this social experiment, we actually prove that what's important is not only that professional developers develop a social conscientious game to the players, but also the players could become a sort of creators. And then in this, in the next video that I'm going to show is a game exhibition that we designed to the public with game literacy purposes and using gamification designs. And it becomes one of the major gateway for the normal Chinese parents and Chinese teachers to get to know games better. And in this exhibition that we have a game history wall and also the player type classification. We have game playing in a storied natural setting, and we have a special design tarot system, which is shown on the left for exploration. And this had been a major game literacy experiment that raised a lot of public interest. And it also attracts a lot of the educators to come to us and to see whether there's any collaborative, interesting project that we can do together. And please take a look at the video.
这是今年我们和 éstos 一起策的展。这一次的展是一个以游戏为主题的展，但它可能不像传统的展，就是比如说是以科技为主题的。我们其实更希望强调游戏的人，因为我们管叫游戏的人档案馆，就是 Homo Ludens Archive。它的重点就是说，我们每一个人像我们是智人 Homo sapiens 一样，我们其实都是游戏人，我们注定要通过游戏来完成自我和理解世界。蘑菇人是我们档案馆的一个象征物，是依赖游戏能量而生的。蘑菇在游戏里又是一个很独特的东西，比如爱丽丝吃下蘑菇以后，她开始了她的冒险。蘑菇是一个能开启其他次元的东西。
这个和游戏的场景有点像，就是游戏本来就是一个打开可能性之门的媒介。其实我们在每一个游戏里面，你进去的时候，你都在做一个身份的转换。
这次的展里面，以蘑菇人作为小朋友的象征和一个玩家的导引。
蘑菇人就像是一个异世界向导吧，所以其实在这个基础上，我们就大概创作了一个故事线。蘑菇人就是特别多的地方呢，就会有很多的像素，然后就会有一些像素的智慧流传下来，也有向孩子们征集，也有向研究者们征集一些就是关于游戏的深度思考，包括问题，然后也包括答案。是希望大家能够开始想到，其实游戏有很多有意思的事，都与科学都相关。
游戏能量多的地方才能长起这样的橡树，这也是他们传承的游戏智慧，这也和整个的这一套这个游戏化的体系是一脉相承的。基本上就是一个收集塔罗牌，然后按照你的游戏行动来判定你的玩家类型的这么一个设计。
但最终我们判定你为思考者玩家。
那这里其实是蘑菇人的一个成年仪式。那蘑菇人他们成年就是通过在游戏室里面找到自己的位置，熟悉自己的玩家类型。那我们作为人类其实也可以向他们学习。所以在这儿呢，我们准备了一个玩家分类的测试。这个玩家分类会和大家在最后的一个仪式和在这个展里面的一个完满的感觉是相关的。能够帮助大家更好地认识自己的玩家属性，更好地认识自己是什么样的人的东西。到最后就是希望有一个从天人合一到人的觉醒的这么一个循环。
Right. So that has been our venture into the education system, and then because, as I mentioned, the Chinese youngsters can only play games for 3 hours a week. That gives them rather low game literacy, and that's why we also set up a field trip of game archive to foster the game literacy program on them.
Un paseo para concienciar a los jóvenes, despertar su curiosidad.
Items, and then to play games at a relatively short time to get access to all sorts of games from all sorts of platforms, and then to do a reflective personal game history and so on the right part of this screen. And I think what is most important is that the children play as many as they want, and to ask them to play as many good games as they could, and then they can make their own choice. So we don't really educate the youngsters. Who we really educate on are the teachers. And you can see from the videos that they play the physical games, and they play actor games and console games and handheld games and all sorts of other games, and also VR games, virtual reality games. Because those students have no access or knowledge of those type of games. The type of game that they get to know is only the mobile game, and we think it's very unhealthy. You need to have a more balanced diet for gaming. And that's why we were invited to a number of local schools to give this sort of experience to the young generation so that they have a more nuanced attitude towards gaming. We also do public interviews, podcasts, lectures, and things like this, and oral history and things. And also, in terms of oral history, it is very functional because it actually let the public know that the game is made by different people from different development talent. And those becomes a knowledge base for career selection in the long run. And also it gives the game people in China more cultural confidence so that they can venture forth to produce games that express a very cultural attitude. And we were also digitizing Chinese game heritage by a website catalog for Chinese game magazines. And you could come to our official website, 3w.gamearchive.cn, and then you can search for all the collections of Chinese magazines from our catalog. It has never been cataloged for any database or library before, so it's not searchable before we are digitizing it. But currently, we are very happy to offer that as an open knowledge to the public. And also, if you are curious about what China's own game history is, you could come to the link provided here on this page, where we had an interactive online game history timeline, where we include 408 gaming events, where 184 events related to Chinese gaming industry. And you can take a browse through all these important games and game policy and people. And so you get to know what really is important to this industry. And I'll ignore the part of game research and its functions. As you can see, we've done a lot. And then we have a number of affiliated local branches for HLA. For example, our Shanghai branch would be majorly for industry event. And then our Zhuhai branch is for oral history solicit. And the Hangzhou branch used to be the museum that we talk about. And it became a base for game developers and other things. So we were still developing and we were still expanding. We will have a base in Chengdu on game literacy and gamification educational endeavors. And so basically speaking, we think we serve for the society and for a more healthier ecology of the industry. And we also came up with a reclassification of game based on their economic model, where we divide game into consumption game, craft game, and gambling game. And different type of game would have different strategy of use. So we encourage craft game to be used for classrooms, which is the last example I'm going to cite here. And that in the past, I used this game. It's called The Big Sale in a history class in Tsinghua University, and where we combine games and gamified teaching plan and literacy education together into this genre called Class C game. And then I did this for the history class, where students were grouped into two groups, and one would sail the Columbus line in the game, and then the other one would sail Da Gama's line in the game, and then they will have to pass the historic sites according to the historical record. And then they evaluate each other's effort and does this historical reflection on what they have accomplished. And from that class, we find that the student was very good at understanding the idea of history compared to only remembering the historical knowledges. So based on that, we come up with a series of game cultivating people workshop where we attracted 372 teachers who produced 18 groups of teaching plan covering 12 subjects for secondary and high school learning. And that is our use of game into classroom and to facilitate the teachers to make better use of it. And we thought of this as a takeover process where we open the toolbox of gamification and then use game as a cultural process into the classroom and to form a nonprofit co-creation game literacy process. And then the second workshop happened in Chengdu and last month, where 18 teaching plans were also co-created. But besides the subject-based learning, we have a lot of social worker and volunteers join the co-creation process to incorporate life education into this project. And it's still yet growing. And so we think what is mostly important is as a co-creation process, in the end, other teachers could just take this teaching plan and then use it in his classroom. And that's what we want. We think it's the toolbox that we can provide to the public to make use of game. And so basically that's it. And then if you are interested in us, you could visit our website, www.gamearchive.cn, where we still have a lot of materials available. And you could also take a look at our Bilibili account or our WeChat account if you know how to read Chinese. But anyway, that finishes my talk. And I see there are a few people who actually raise some questions. Let me take a look. What characters?
Well, let's put applause first and say thank you to Professor Liu for a wide-ranging and very interesting talk. And very thought-provoking talk. I found as a historian of China, I was very much interested in your historical, review in the beginning, and it was very interesting to see the video game set in a wider cultural context of game culture, and also, the presentation of Homo Ludens Archive, these wide-ranging projects. So thank you so much for a thought-provoking talk. And even though we have run out of
Agradecemos
time,
a Felania por su exposición.
Questions, and maybe, I can read out these questions to you. There's the first question, which is, which asks, how do you define a good game? What characteristics make a game beneficial for children?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for hosting this talk. And sorry for speaking over time. I get more excited than I should be. So in terms, I think it's very difficult to.
Me parece que es muy difícil definir.
Sort of dangerous to do so. So the way we are approaching that topic is we think of whether games can be used and reused in social setting. So in terms of children's education, we would always recommend to the parents to select the craft game as, I don't know if I'm still showing the screen, but.
No, you are not, but I think,
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm showing now. So we almost always recommend the parents and teachers to use the craft game in classroom use and for educational purposes. And those are the games whose economic model is a payoff model, more like artwork. And where for the majority of people in China, the game that we are most popular with us are the consumption game, where the games are free to play, but then they purchase you for certain character or items in the game. And for that type of game, we call it the consumption game. Those system was majorly a consumption system. And so we suggest limit use for classroom, but we would encourage people to use those type of game for life education. For example, if you want to teach them about failure, then play a mobile game with them. If you want to teach them about cooperation, then maybe you play some Nintendo Switch game together. So what we really want to encourage is to think about use and reuse of game in education setting instead of only selecting good and bad games. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And there's another question which asks, as a gamer, can you share any personal experience where gaming positively influenced your personal or professional life?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I'm a player myself, and as one of the video shows that my father was the person who led me into the world of gaming. And I actually talk about that in the interview, that my father used to be a military strategist, and he when he played the game of Tank War with me, he he opened the design. They actually have a design interface in the game, and he designed every stage and then play with me and then educate me along the process. And that had been a very important piece of personal history to me, because I grow to think that game should be played among generations, like what my father did to me. And then in the meantime, I think games are educational from the very start. I mean, it's entertaining, but in the meantime, if you play Civilization before a history class, then you will certainly learn something and learn faster than your classmate who only read books. And so I think myself as a player, my life attitude is also been sort of shaped through gaming. So and my current career as a gaming historian, I venture forth and play all the time to open a world of possibilities enabled by gaming. I hope that helps.
Yeah. So what you suggest, in a way, what I understand, it's not really the game, but it's the setting in which you play the game. Right. So it is with whom you game. It's the attitude. So which is so important. Attitude. So in that sense, it's what you also call gaming literacy. To put it into a good context. Well, I take the prerogative as a moderator to ask a question and to close. There's one question, maybe in Chinese as well, which you might want to answer maybe directly in the chat. But but the question is that you presented the Homo Ludens archive. And I was wondering, to what extent this institution, which you created, is unique in the world.
Me preguntaba.
I mean, do you collaborate internationally with similar institutions? I mean, because I'm not a gamer, so I'm very alien to this world. I wonder, to what extent, what you have created and what you're doing is unique, to China, or can we see, parallels in the world? Are there other archives who do, have similar projects in the world?
Yes. That's a great question, and that actually allowed me to present some of the things that I very quickly skipped. Yes, there are other game archives worldwide. In Japan and in America, there are also game archives in existence, but we are sort of unique because we develop with the industry. And in a more developed industry, for example, like US and Japan, whom we shared very friendly collaboration with. We went to Replaying Japan last year and talked to the game archive over there. And we are going to the US this August. Next month, I think, the month after next month. Also to the Strong Museum of Play to talk about possible research possibilities on game preservations. But what's unique about us is that because we are in the developing industry and we grow with that industry, and that allow us with more room to create using the artifact that we are keeping. Well, in the meantime, for the more developed country, because of the intellectual property law and due to certain industry change that's already been in development. So they were more about research and collection rather than taking active effort to make use of the game archives that they have, because a lot of them had been very heavily infringed by law. While in China, it's not really a problem because for example, we were digitizing the game magazines, and they cannot do that due to copyright issues. But we can do that because 90% of game magazines publishers in China go bankrupt. So they do not have legal right anymore. So it's sort of a really different scenario. And also in terms of the creators, the game creators, that they actually embrace our effort to use their game in classrooms. While in Western settings, you might need to talk to more lawyers about whether I could do this or not doing that. So I think it sort of is a developing edge that we are having right now because we develop with the industry. So we share the trust, and then there are more room for explorations for us in the game term.
So thank you very much. And there was the last question asking whether there is a master in gaming in Beijing. Somebody seems to be interesting to study.
Oh, yes. The thing is the educational department, I mean the bureaucratic department that is in charge of education is not very supportive of gaming. So in China, we have some master degree with game design, but we don't yet have a master degree with game research because the educational bureau does not support it. While in the meantime, there are still universities you can do that. I was in CTU yesterday. No, today. I just flew from Hong Kong to Beijing. And so they actually have a very good game program there. And one of my senior colleague, Espen Osset, who had also been my BNU colleague, he is currently the dean in the CTU's game program. So if you want to go to a master degree getting in game research and game design, I think Hong Kong and Singapore might still be the right place to go. Well, in the meantime, you can feel free to join us at BNU, where we have a digital media master program and also a technical artist master program, and all had my teaching and all involved HLA at a certain extent. And of course, the exhibitions that we mentioned during this talk was on in the art gallery in various places. And so you can feel free to check out our website and WeChat materials to see where they are.
Excellent. So I think, I can see that some people have left, but the majority has actually stayed, which just shows, how interesting and fascinating, this talk was. I'm very happy, to have learned a lot in this 1.5 hours, and we hope, maybe to be able in the future to collaborate from the Instituto Confucio de Madrid here in Spain. So thank you very much, Professor Liu, and
thank you
for the audience to have joined us, and thank you to see all the video gamers and enthusiasts to have joined us. So
thanks everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you guys, and thanks for all the questions and all the feedbacks. I'm very delightful for everything.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.